Madam Clarkson, do you remember what your first impressions were when you walked into Rideau Hall as Governor General?
Well, actually, we had a little tour just before I was sworn in, and it was the moment we walked in the front door, there was a thunderstorm, and everything was gray. So it was rather ominous, and actually the whole house was white inside, sort of a white color. And I thought, what a shame, because you could see that the bones were very good of this house. This house is a Regency villa originally, and I did art and archaeology at university, and so I know about periods of houses, and I'm fond of certain ones, and my dream has always been to live in a Georgian house, and I never have, and I never will, probably. The center hall, with the 2 rooms coming off and all of that, it's never going to happen. So I've always been very sensitive to particularly domestic architecture. And although I knew that Rideau Hall had not been built as a house, I was very interested in the fact that it was all white inside, and also that there was no art virtually, and nothing really. And I thought, how odd. And then afterwards, I looked in books, and I looked in one of the things that Mrs. Michener had written, because Mrs. Michener was a very interesting person who lived at Rideau Hall. And even in her pictures, it looked like the lobby before it was redone of the Chateau Laurier. And that's the general feeling. It had a sort of hotel anonymous feeling. And I thought, this doesn't have, there hasn't, a lick of paint in this place will do a lot. And so I didn't have to do much research, because I do know what 19th century houses are supposed to look like. In fact, in Toronto, I've always lived in the Annex, which is about 1880 to 1890. Now, this is an earlier house. It's about 1850. And you can look at, though, exactly what they're like. And I'm fortunate in that I've seen a lot of houses in England and in France. So I knew that if the walls were painted, this would make a great deal of difference. The architectural details are all here. And I thought, well, when we I think the first time we were living here, I was still reading Christopher Gibbs' biography of the Duke of Wellington. I happen to be a great Duke of Wellington fan. I read everything about him. And in one of the chapters, he writes a letter to a friend saying, to his daughter, actually, I am exhausted. I have been going around the countryside by stagecoach from red dining room to red dining room eating. And of course, our dining room was white. and that was where we started, because of course, we had to, it was not normal that you would paint everything, although there were some things on a cycle. Various rooms got painted at times. And I said, this dining room can be painted. Well, you know what happened? Actually, there was a flood, and the ceiling leaked. And so the dining room, the small dining room, was the first one to be done. And so we did that, just as like a color of the Duke of Wellington. And it's a deep red, which is a very, in fact, in Britain, it's considered almost a cliche to have a red dining room, but there you are. It works here, and it works for the period. So it was one thing not to be a slave to the period, but on the other hand, to make sure that what was beautiful in the house came out. The second thing was the art. I thought, we can't buy art, of course, but there must be stuff around. So the first thing I did, because I went to the warehouse where the furniture is kept for all the official residences, and I looked around for various things, and I found a wonderful bench that actually had a plaque on the bottom of it, said, given by the people of Ontario to the Governor General of Canada, 1942 or something like that. So I thought, it belongs back in Rideau Hall. The other thing I found there was a magnificent Christopher Pratt painting of a big kind of, looked like a tomb, but it wasn't. And I remember the show when that had been shown at Mira Goddard's gallery. And I love Christopher's paintings. We're friends. And I remember looking at it. I think it cost at the time $20,000, and that was about 30 years ago. And so it was worth a lot more then. But there it was in the warehouse. So I said, we'll have that, and we'll put it in the hallway. Then I thought, what about asking all the public galleries if they will lend so that we can show them? And then we will say, and we did, we'll open up the whole hallway, and we'll have art tours, and we'll show people the art that is in all the different galleries in Canada, so that when they have events here, like Order of Canada, Bravery, and so on, we'll open up the house right down to where our offices are and show everything. And basically, I felt that we had to have something that was like a house, that was living, and that it wasn't like a hotel where you go up and live in your 1,000 square feet, because that's the size of the apartment upstairs. That was the size of the apartment for us. It was 2 rooms, two large rooms, and one we used as our living and sort of small dining room. It was one big room with a little kitchen, which I installed because I felt I had to cook, because I like to cook, and even though there's cooking here, I like to feel that on the weekends I could cook. And then another room was the bedroom. And I thought, you know, we're not going to stay like that. We've always lived in rather large houses. And when I was Agent General in France, we lived in a very large apartment in Paris. And I thought, we want to have places where we can read, where we can use this as a house. So what we did was we installed reading lamps everywhere in this room, which is the large salon. We changed all the furniture around so that we could have groupings, and you could come in and read the newspaper and feel that you could be at home. And also in the smaller sitting room, what we called the yellow sitting room, reading lamps again so that you could sit down and read a book or whatever. And we felt that we had little Bose radios too in 2 of the rooms, so that you could put the radio on. You couldn't lug your CDs everywhere, but you could at least have your radio on. So the aim was to make it like a living house, and then when people had tours of it, to feel that this was a house in which you had the best and most beautiful things in Canada, and that was really important to us.
Why was that important to you, though? Because, you know, throughout what you've just said, you've talked about it as a house. It's a house, it's a house. It's not that it's a residence, but that it's a house. Why was it important to you that people, not just you, but other people should feel that this was a living home?
This is a living home because the Governor General has lived here ever since the beginning of Confederation. And it's not only the house, but it's where everything political happens. Every cabinet has been sworn in here. That is our tradition. We aren't Americans. We don't do things in front of the Capitol. We don't do things, therefore, here in front of Parliament. Our tradition is that every single cabinet of every government is sworn here. And that is very, very important. The Governor General is the representative of the Crown, and the Crown is the ultimate legitimacy of our Constitution. So even when Mr. Diefenbaker was practically at death's door with pneumonia, he tottered up from 24 Sussex and came over for 15 minutes with his cabinet. And of course, it was the days before. There was extensive television coverage and wall-to-wall commentary. And he tottered up and he had his cabinet sworn in, and then he tottered back to 24 Sussex. And so it always has been done here. So the House has to have a dual function of being the home of the Governor General, and it also has to have that feeling of it's used by the people who live here. And it is very much, it's got to be made habitable so that the people who live here feel that they belong here during the 5, or in my case 6 years that you're here. And we felt that we had to do that. Or I think if you live in large space and you just, you know, inhabit one little nook, you're like mice. You know, you're like the little mice in the Beatrice Potter thing, you know, the mice of Gloucester that just come out at night sort of thing. And that's, you know, that's why we tried to make it as de-institutionalized as possible. The other thing that we really noticed right away, I guess because we go to movies a lot or whatever, is that in all the hallways, the big exit signs. And we fought for years to say, please, upstairs where our apartment is, please don't have a big exit sign, bright red. And we do know how to get out of here, even in our pajamas and without our glasses on. And please don't have that on so that when we go out, we immediately see an exit sign so that we can run down the staircase. In any case, I don't think we ever won that one. You know, there are certain battles that you can keep fighting, and you pointed out, but we didn't win it. We'd always seem to have an exit sign. That was kind of disturbing, but we eventually did not let it get on our nerves.
Were you able to have friends come and be with you like other people are in a regular home?
Yes, we were able to have friends come, and we were able to, because upstairs there are really only 5 bedrooms. It's a large house by national standards, of course, but it wasn't like a palace with 25 bedrooms in places that are in the rest of the world. So we were able to have people come, and we always made a point of it whenever we had ceremonies to have people come and stay so that they would feel that they had been at Rideau Hall. And it's a once-in-a-lifetime experience for a lot of people to be at Rideau Hall. And we always had Christmas here, and although we wanted to sometimes have Christmas at the Citadel, but that would have meant, you know, the staff having to give up their Christmas, which we didn't want to do. So we always had Christmas here, and we, particularly at Christmas, we had it full with family mainly and friends. So we did have people come from time to time, you know, and if somebody was getting an award and we knew them and had always known them, then they would come and stay. And that was always very, very rewarding. And I think they all remember it because they all tell us about it now, and it's, you know, been a number of years since we were here.
You must have had some interesting house guests. Do you have any in particular that stand out?
Well, one of them that was really quite marvelous in his own way was a president of an African country. And he was a very vigorous type person. And at the end of the state dinner, he was accompanied upstairs. There's certain rituals that he's accompanied upstairs by the aide-de-camp and so on. The aide-de-camp says to him, "Would you like anything else?" And so the president turned to him and said, "Yes, what time is it?" And aide-de-camp said, "It's now 11. And he said, "At 1 o'clock, I would like to play squash." And, you know, 1 a.m., right? "I would like to play squash." And the aide-de-camp gulped and said, "Squash." And he said, "Yes, I would like to play squash. I like to do my exercise, and I won't have time tomorrow." He was a very large gentleman, so the aide-de-camp was worried. In the back of his head, he thought, So he came running to our door, and he said he wants to play squash. I said, "Well, if he wants to play squash, see if you can find out if you can get a gym open." And, you know, he said, "I'm worried he might die of a heart attack on us." I said, "Well, that's not our problem. He wants to go. Let's try to accommodate it." So aide-de-camps can be wonderful, and they were the closest people to us because they live in the house as well. And they're the only people who live here. The rest of the rooms are all daytime offices. And so he got a gym open, he took the president, he played squash with him, and brought him home by 2:30.
That's remarkable.
That is one of the more remarkable ones, yes. And the most fond memory I have of a house guest is Pina Bausch, the great German dancer, with her company, the Pina Bausch Dance Theater. And she performed for three times at the National Arts Center. And she stayed with us. The company stayed at a hotel, but she stayed with us. And I will tell you a secret. When I came to Rideau Hall, everybody smoked here. And yet, all government buildings, there was no smoking. And so everybody smoked at the night of the installation, my installation. And I was quite upset about that because I thought, you know, I don't think that's right. There's no... Anyway, I said, I don't think we should have smoking anymore. And so we didn't. And when Pina Bausch came about 4 years later, Pina Bausch smoked about 7 packages of cigarettes a day, I think. And she was a dancer, and she was marvelous, etc. Anyway, she is the only person I ever allowed to smoke at Rideau Hall because she could not live without a cigarette there. I mean, it's only when she was on stage dancing, which she wasn't doing anymore at the age of 60, that she did not smoke. But she smoked. I just said, "Please keep the windows open and don't tell anybody that you're doing this." And she said, "No, I'll throw the ashes out the window." So our wild Ragosa roses underneath her window have the ashes from Pina Bausch's cigarettes. But that was lovely to have her.
You described the aide-de-camps who live in Rideau Hall, and then the fact that during the day this is in fact a functioning office. Mm-hmm. Was that difficult for you to have an office inside your home?
Not at all, because the place is large enough. And I think that it's wonderful. And actually, we've replicated it now where we have a large house in Toronto, and our basement is large and high, and our 2 staff are in there. And it's very, very nice, actually, because now that I don't have to do a huge number of functions starting at 8 o'clock in the morning or anything, I trail around in my dressing gown quite a lot, and I can still, deal with stuff in the office. And so I don't have that feeling of this is private, and I don't want anyone to see that. My office door was always open. I always wanted to hear, if I heard people giggling or walking up and down the thing, I'd say, "What's going on?" I always liked to have that contact. I grew up in television. I grew up in a very collegial atmosphere. For nearly 30 years, I worked in various shows where we all worked in kind of great open areas where we would say, hey, did you hear that? We would just exchange these ideas. And I liked that kind of thing, and I'd never dropped that. I didn't grow up in bureaucratic cubicles and with hierarchy at all. In fact, it was a kind of shock to be called Your Excellency and so on, because in the world that I came from professionally, everybody was called by their first name. I mean, even the guy who was the executive producer down to the person who was lifting the wires, everybody was first name basis. And so I know that in a place like this, there is a certain respect and hierarchy, and I respect that. I wasn't going to change that. I think that's part of the office. But I think to keep your door open, to be able to hear people going up, or to hear suddenly something shouted and you say, hey, what was that? And you come running out of your office and you can hear it, is a very good thing. And I think I did not worry about that. And I liked it because it was convenient and it saved time. And you're very busy when you're Governor General. You're very, very busy. You have, when you're here, you have several events a day. When you're traveling and you're on a trip, you'll have, you may give 7 speeches a day. You may find that you never have really a moment where you aren't talking with somebody who's going to organize something for you or tells you how to do this or that. Every moment of your day is registered out by the work of the aide-de-camp and the people who do the programming. And so everything, you have to respect that work that they put into it. They didn't do it for nothing. They did it so that everything would work. And the way things worked were wonderful. And so I felt that it was great to have that. I never felt that I was intruded upon. And then, of course, if the weather was good, and even if it was snowy and everything, you could just walk out into the garden and you had that space around you. What you lose, really, is that feeling of living in a neighborhood on a street where you see the next door person shoveling and you're shoveling and you exchange remarks about whose dog has come and done something on your lawn and how you can get them to stop, please. But you don't have that sort of thing. And that's a little bit isolating from other people. But within our group of, who's at Rideau Hall and who's on what I'd call the mission, it was a great thing to be all together like that. It was really quite wonderful.
Were you able to trail around in your dressing gown here?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. And the stairs from the main apartment came down sort of to our 2 offices. And I did, and that was on weekends, basically, because during the week you'd start at 7 in the morning. And I always started it with a staff meeting at about 8 o'clock. We'd have a one half hour meeting where we were all in the room. We knew what we were doing for the day, and then new things were brought up. And then every 2 or 3 weeks, we went through things for the next couple of months. New invitations, new things, so that everything would be done in order. And I have a kind of mania, perhaps, of getting things done on time and structured so that other people's time will not be wasted. And that, again, comes from my background of having been executive producer of a number of programs where a lot of money was at stake. You had to plan out things. My last program was a big budget, arts programming show. And you planned out everything. So you wanted to have every detail under your control, and here you can't have every detail, but you know the people who control the details. So that's what you give them the mission to do. And it worked beautifully because the people are all professional, and you had to communicate your enthusiasm for certain things or get the ideas out. And this house was very comfortable for doing that sort of thing, and that was always held in my office, and we held it always just to 3/4 of an hour maximum, so that we could every day we had something and we faced each other every day. I believe in that. At the time I was here, I'll tell you a secret. I didn't use a computer or anything. I didn't know how to use a computer. Even today, I don't really know. I use an iPad.
I was going to say, you're an iPad whiz.
I'm an
sure.
iPad person. I'm an iPad person. But I also like, being able to talk to people face to face. I like people to come straight to me and tell me about things. I don't like to be told about something. And I feel that I can make the assessments properly when I talk to people face to face. And this house worked beautifully from that point of view. It seemed to me that it had the corridors worked well. You could hear people coming up and down them. Because we were here, no time is wasted going to and from an office. And I've always lived downtown in Toronto. I've always lived within since I was 17. When I went to Toronto to university, I have lived within a mile of Avenue Road and Bloor. And so I've always walked everywhere. To me, Toronto is a village which is right in the center, and I've gone back to living there. And so I like to see that I'm centered somewhere, and that was this place. But the house itself was a wonderful challenge to do, to make it feel like both a monument, which it is, and also a home.
Were you satisfied with the results of your work?
Terrifically satisfied, with the help of all the staff here, Anne Bianconi and Perry, who looks after the place.
Because it's certainly not white anymore.
No, it's not white. Every color was chosen with great care, and also I worked very closely with Anne because, for instance, because of the size of the rooms, the state dining room, which holds 42 people, that apricot that we chose for it, if you had used the same apricot through the whole thing, it would look really strange because part of it wouldn't look the same color. We had to tint the end part a lighter color, a darker color than the part that you enter from the hallway.
How interesting.
So that it would all be the same color.
It just gradually becomes...
Yeah, it changes, yes.
That something?
So that was a challenge and interesting. And I think in another life, I could have been an interior designer or an architect. Problem is, I don't know how to draw. But you see, Freud was right in that children live the unlived lives of their parents. My daughter is a fabulous architect, graduate of Yale, and she does design and architecture. And it's one I would always have loved to have done that. I have no talent for drawing whatsoever, but I know when I see things whether they're right. I know how to put together the colors of this room, for instance. That kind of color between the ochre between the red, that's something that you can see, is going to work within this kind of context. And doing that kind of thing, looking at this was all white. Okay, everything was white.
I can't imagine.
Well, it looked like nothing.
Right.
I mean, it could have been anything.
Yeah.
It could have been, the latest condo built downtown. Because it was all white. All the moldings disappeared, everything. And so to put the color in was to do what originally was supposed to be. You realize white was the color that poor people used in the 19th century. They whitewashed the interiors of houses to keep down the bugs. And that's what they did. Lime wash kept down the bugs. Huh. So people who had houses colored their houses. They didn't have to worry about the bugs because they had people to help clean, and they kept their houses clean, and they had floors. They didn't have just dirt or straw on the floors. So that was something. I really welcomed the idea of being able to bring this back to what it was, and also there were many things in storage that were not used. Carpets, pieces of furniture, and they just had to be brought out and reupholstered so that they matched colors. But there were no purchases had to be made, really, because all the stuff was here. This room was white, and then it had white sofas in it, and two blue chairs in it. So all you had to do was paint the rooms, recover the sofas, and that was that. It made a lot of difference.
One of the questions that I was interested in was your own personal kitchen. Because you do have a staff here. You have people who will prepare your meals. But it was important to you to have your own kitchen. Yes,
it's very hard to teach people, and you don't want to waste their time, of how to do a Chinese stir-fry. And the kitchen at Rideau Hall, if you've ever been into it, is a very large kitchen. I mean, we presented 60,000 meals a year here. And so occasionally I would go down because I like the kitchen staff a lot and the chefs, and I would go down and watch them do something. I, learned how to make a lobster sausage, for instance, and various other little things I was really interested in, because I did cooking when I was a student in Paris years ago, and I love to cook, and I'm very interested in cooking. I'm interested in the chemistry of cooking and how things go together and how you can make things work, etc. So I really know quite a lot about cooking, and I like it. So I thought in the weekends it would be kind of fun to be able to at least do our own little soups and our, and stir fries and various things like that. And it's just important to keep your hand in it. But my talents diminished. In 6 years, my talents as a cook diminished because the fifth year we were at the cottage, and we used to go to the cottage for 2 full weeks. And at the end of it, my husband said to me, it's a good thing that this will be over soon, because you're losing your managerial capacities as a cook. And what he meant was that I wasn't, the rice wasn't ready at the same time as the meat was. Cooking is managerial. Cooking is not just being able to throw it all together and taste things. It's getting everything together at once so that you can all sit down and eat in order and so on. And I was losing that. I could still do it, but I was losing the skill of getting it all together.
I think your husband is a very brave man for having said that.
No, I was very interested in that because I was feeling it myself. I was feeling somehow a little harassed when I was cooking, just even for, 5 or 6 people at the cottage. And that I normally would never, it's nothing to me to have, 10 people arrive and we suddenly do things. I share that with the Chief Justice. She loves to cook. And that's the one other place I would cook. It was up at her cottage. And we would cook together. And she has a pie plate shaped like the state of Texas. So we used to make pies in that pie plate. And we loved to cook. We cooked together, and we had a wonderful time. And I just enjoyed it very, very much. So I didn't want to give up any cooking at all. I mean, it's not a loss to me if I never cook breakfast, because I don't enjoy breakfast. I usually just have cereal and milk and yogurt. But the rest of it, it's exciting to cook.
I don't want to keep you any longer. I know that we have to get you to your next event. It's been such a pleasure to chat with you, and that was just a delightful set of tales about Rideau Hall. I think that's really terrific. Is there anything that
Would you like anything else? Oh, of course you can. Don't worry. Yeah, don't worry. I know what stage they're at in there. Don't worry.
There was just that wonderful story that you told about how you recalled one Order of Canada dinner when you're sitting there and you're suddenly realising that only you have been asked to speak, and then you invite everybody. Could you tell that story? Because I love that. And you have that wonderful quote where you say, even state dinners where everybody is dressed in evening clothes doesn't have to be stuffed.
Yeah.
I love that. So is that
okay,
great?
good.
Thank you.
We had a lot of dinners here for the events, and they were always a high point for us. And we took them, again, this is the way of living in this house as though it were our house, and to make it warm and friendly. And so that every dinner that we had, John and I would spend a half an hour of the day of that dinner placing people at the tables so that people would enjoy who they were with. And at first, people were a little shocked because they were, people expect to go to dinners and they expect sometimes to sit with their spouse. What could be more uninteresting? Especially, but not because you don't love your spouse, but you see them all the time, hopefully. And we wanted to have people mix up so they would meet interesting people. So we always separated couples, and they sat at different tables. And we were very fortunate in that we know a lot of people in Canada, and we know a lot of people who were coming to the dinners. We knew what they did. And so we'd go over, the staff would place things, and then we would go over it, and we would place people so that we thought they'd meet somebody interesting. And then I always gave the speech, how the orders, the Governor General speaks, the honors are given out, then you have a dinner. And I thought, really, people would like to hear from the Order of Canada people. The motto of the Order of Canada is they desire a better country. Well, why do they desire a better country? I wanted to know why some of these people had worked as hard as they did so that they merited the Order of Canada. So I always picked 5 or 6 to speak after dinner. And just to say, in 3 minutes, and they were never warned until dinner time, but of course they were all capable of getting up and speaking. They all enjoyed it, actually. And I said to Shirley Douglas, who was Tommy Douglas' daughter, or say somebody like Hugh Segal, what inspired you, etc. And they got up and they would speak. And it was so moving, and everybody loved it because it gave, and then of course they were able to chat after because they'd heard those stories, and it was, like a friendly dinner. You had that sort of feeling. And that was really important. And it meant, too, that even though it's in the ballroom or it's in the tent room, which are very big and formal rooms, which people don't go into many times in their lives, nobody does, that they didn't feel that it was just, they were just awestruck or, nothing happened there except that it was an occasion. We want that occasion to have human meaning. We wanted that occasion to have a significance. And I remember Hugh Segal getting up and talking about being so poor in Montreal that he didn't ever have toys, really. And he was 5 or 6 when he was given his first toy, and how much that meant to him. And women were crying. It was so moving. And I had known Hugh for 30 years, and I did not know that about him. And people felt then that there was a kind of trust and friendship in the evening that was simply great. You don't have to be, just because you are honoring people in a beautiful place that has a history and that is an instrument of state, doesn't mean it has to be stuffy. It doesn't have to be. It can be warm and interesting, and we felt that that's what it should be.